If you want to understand whether your partner is an avoidant who never truly lets go, you have to start by stepping into their internal world, not to excuse their behavior but to decode it. Most people misinterpret avoidance as indifference. They assume distance equals disinterest, that silence means they don't care. But in reality, avoidance is rarely about a lack of feeling. It's about fear, it's about self-protection. It's about someone who has learned, often from a very young age, that closeness is dangerous and vulnerability is a risk they can't afford to take. Avoidant individuals grow up with deep, rooted psychological patterns shaped by early experiences. Perhaps a caregiver who was emotionally unavailable, dismissive, or inconsistent. They learned that needing someone often led to disappointment. So they adapted, they built walls instead of bridges. They convinced themselves that independence is safety, and that self-reliance is the only reliable form of love. As adults, those same defense mechanisms show up in their relationships, not as conscious choices but as automatic responses. The closer someone tries to get, the more their subconscious tells them to back away. This is why they often seem so contradictory. They might express affection one day and withdraw the next. They might say they want closeness and then vanish when you offer it. They're not playing games in the manipulative sense. They're battling an internal conflict between their need for connection and their fear of it. That's the paradox of avoidance. They want love, but the moment it feels too close, their system perceives it as a threat. And so they run, not from you, but from the vulnerability that loving you requires. But here's the part most people miss. Avoidance doesn't mean absence of attachment. In fact, avoidant individuals can form very strong bonds. They feel deeply. They just don't know how to express those feelings without feeling exposed. So they suppress, they compartmentalize, they push you away not because they've stopped caring, but because caring feels overwhelming. And yet, despite the walls they build, they often stay tethered to the very person they're trying to distance from. They don't truly let go because deep down, the bond matters more than they're willing to admit. Think about it like this. Someone with an avoidant pattern is standing on the edge of a pool. They want to dive in. They crave the water. But every time they inch closer, their mind screams, "It's too deep, too dangerous, too unknown." So they retreat to the edge, close enough to feel the mist, far enough to stay safe. That's the dance they do in relationships. And if you're the one on the other side, it can be maddening. One moment you feel their presence, the next they're gone. One day they open up, the next they're distant. But this isn't about you. It's about the internal battle they're fighting. A battle between desire and fear, closeness and safety, love and self-protection. Now, understanding this isn't about tolerating unhealthy behavior or justifying emotional distance. It's about clarity. Because when you understand what drives avoidance, you stop taking their actions so personally. You stop internalizing their withdrawal as a reflection of your worth. You start to see that their behavior is less about you and more about their unresolved wounds. And that shift in perspective is powerful. It allows you to make conscious choices about how you want to engage, whether that's setting firmer boundaries, creating space for your own healing, or deciding that their push-pull dynamic is no longer something you're willing to participate in. The truth is, you cannot fix someone's fear of intimacy. You cannot love away their avoidance. But you can understand it. And in understanding it, you reclaim your power. You see the pattern for what it is, and you stop chasing the illusion that their distance is about your inadequacy. Because it's not. It never was. And here's the paradox they don't want to admit. The more you understand their fear, the less control it has over you. The moment you stop being confused by their distance is the moment you stop being controlled by it. And that, right there, is the beginning of your freedom. Once you understand the mindset of an avoidant, the next piece of the puzzle is recognizing the pattern they operate in. The push-pull cycle that keeps you emotionally entangled. This cycle isn't random. It's not a series of coincidences or mixed signals. It's a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. And once you see it for what it is, you'll stop being confused by their behavior and start reclaiming control over your emotional space. Here's how it usually unfolds. When intimacy grows, when connection deepens, and when vulnerability starts to feel real, the avoidant begins to feel trapped. Not trapped by you, but by the rising tide of emotional closeness that triggers their deepest fears. Their instinctive reaction is to pull back, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. They may become distant, less communicative, or emotionally unavailable. They might pick fights, withdraw affection, or immerse themselves in work or distractions. These are all defense mechanisms designed to restore their sense of independence and safety. But here's where the paradox kicks in. Once they've pulled back and created distance, they begin to feel the discomfort of that space. Avoidants might fear closeness, but they also fear abandonment. They don't want to be engulfed, but they don't want to be forgotten either. And so, once they sense that you're moving on, once your attention shifts, your energy pulls back, or your focus turns inward, they feel a sudden jolt of anxiety. That's when they return. Maybe it's a text out of nowhere, a casual check in a social media like, or even a full attempt to reconnect. This push-pull cycle is how they maintain control over the relationship without having to face their fear of vulnerability. They get just close enough to feel connected, then pull away before intimacy feels overwhelming. They retreat to feel safe, then return when distance starts to feel like loss. It's not that they're trying to hurt you. Most of the time, they're not even fully aware they're doing it. It's their subconscious way of managing the tension between their need for connection and their fear of dependence. What makes this cycle so powerful and so difficult to break is the emotional roller coaster it creates for you. Every time they pull away, you feel a sense of loss, confusion, and self-doubt. And every time they return, you feel relief, hope, and renewed attachment. That repeated emotional high and low creates a kind of psychological bond that's hard to walk away from. In psychology, this is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the most powerful forms of conditioning. The unpredictability of their attention keeps you hooked, always hoping that this time will be different, always waiting for the version of them you know they can be. The deeper truth is that this cycle isn't about you at all. It's about them trying to regulate their own fears and insecurities. You just happen to be caught in the crossfire, and as long as you're reacting to their pullbacks with pursuit, trying harder, explaining more, proving your worth, the cycle continues. Because every time you chase, you confirm their fear that closeness equals pressure. And every time you pull away, you confirm their fear that distance equals abandonment. That's why the dance never ends. Because both of you are responding to each other's fears without even realizing it. But the cycle can be broken, not by trying to change them, but by changing your response. When you stop chasing, when you stop trying to decode every withdrawal or overanalyze every return, you shift the power dynamic, you create space for clarity. And in that space, one of two things will happen. They will step up and confront their own patterns, or they will drift away because they can no longer control the rhythm. Either outcome is a win for you because it moves you out of confusion and into choice. The push-pull pattern is powerful, but it only has power when you keep dancing to its rhythm. The moment you stop reacting and start observing, you reclaim your peace. And that peace is far more valuable than the roller coaster of someone else's unresolved fears. One of the most confusing parts about dealing with an avoidant partner is that even after they've created distance, even after they've pulled back, maybe even ended the relationship, they rarely truly let go. They may act like they have. They may say they're moving on, that they need space, that they want something different. But beneath that surface narrative, there's often still a deep emotional tether connecting them to you. And the more aware you become of how that tether shows up, the less likely you are to be manipulated or missold by it. Here's the thing: avoidants don't detach in the same way securely attached people do. When most people decide to end a relationship, they gradually release their emotional investment. They stop seeking information, they stop reaching out, and over time the bond weakens. But avoidants often remain psychologically and emotionally attached, even while they maintain physical or emotional distance. It's part of that same internal contradiction. They crave connection but fear closeness. They want to protect themselves but don't want to lose you entirely. So instead of clean breaks, they leave doors half open. You'll notice this in subtle but telling ways. Maybe they text you occasionally just to check in, with no real purpose other than to see if the line is still open. Maybe they pop up on your social media, liking a photo or viewing your stories, not because they want to fully reconnect, but because they want to make sure they haven't been forgotten. They might ask mutual friends about you, show up at places they know you'll be, or send a message on your birthday even though you haven't spoken in months. All of these behaviors are breadcrumbs, tiny ways of maintaining proximity without ever fully stepping back into vulnerability. And sometimes the signs are more covert. They might try to insert themselves into your emotional landscape through subtle criticism of new people in your life, disguised as concern. They might share nostalgic memories, bringing up the good times to reawaken your attachment, or they might suddenly offer emotional support at a moment when you're vulnerable, reestablishing their place as someone significant without committing to anything deeper. This push-pull tactic keeps you anchored in their orbit, wondering if there's still something real there. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps the bond alive. What's important to understand is that this behavior is not always about rekindling the relationship. Often it's about reassurance. Avoidants want to know they still matter. They want to know the door is still open for them, even if they're not ready to walk through it. It's their way of maintaining a sense of control over the connection without having to confront the discomfort that real intimacy brings. It's emotional insurance, a way of keeping you close enough to reach for, if they ever decide they want more, but far enough to avoid the vulnerability they fear. And here's the trap: if you interpret these signals as signs of genuine change, you can end up stuck in an emotional holding pattern, waiting, hoping, replaying the past. That's why awareness is so powerful. When you recognize these behaviors for what they are, not signs of renewed commitment, but symptoms of unresolved attachment, you stop reading meaning where there may be none. You begin to see that their inability to let go isn't proof of love in the way you might wish it were. It's often just proof of fear. The moment you stop responding to breadcrumbs is the moment you reclaim your emotional clarity. You stop confusing proximity with progress. You stop mistaking curiosity for commitment. And you start to realize that your life doesn't have to revolve around someone else's unresolved wounds. Because here's the truth: someone who truly values you doesn't keep you half close. They don't hide behind subtle signals or inconsistent gestures. They show up fully, consistently, and without fear of their own feelings. Until that happens, the signs that they haven't let go are not invitations. They're reminders of where they are stuck. And the more clearly you see that, the more freedom you give yourself to move forward. So don't confuse their inability to let go with destiny. It's not a sign that you're meant to wait. It's a sign that they're still trapped in the very fear they've always been running from. And that's their journey, not yours. Here's the truth that most people struggle to accept. You cannot change an avoidant partner. You cannot love them enough to make them stay. You cannot explain your worth enough to make them see you differently. You cannot chase them into healing. That's not how this works. The only person you have the power to change in this equation, the only person whose behavior you can truly control, is you. And that's exactly where your power lies, not in trying to fix them, but in choosing to reclaim yourself. Avoidants struggle to let go because, on some level, they sense that you haven't let go either. They feel that thread of emotional availability still pulling toward them. Even if you haven't spoken in weeks, even if you're trying to move on, that internal energy, the part of you still waiting, hoping, wondering, creates an invisible bond. It's why they feel safe drifting in and out. It's why they don't fully commit, but also don't fully leave. They sense that you're still holding space for them, and as long as that space exists, the push-pull cycle continues. Breaking that cycle isn't about revenge or playing games. It's not about punishing them by ignoring them or pretending you don't care. It's about shifting your focus from them to you. Because the more attention you give to their behavior, the more you stay trapped in reaction, reacting to their distance, reacting to their return, reacting to their mixed signals. But when you redirect that energy inward, you reclaim the narrative. You begin to ask deeper questions. What do I truly want from a relationship? What does respect look like for me? What boundaries need to exist for me to feel safe, valued, and seen? And when you start answering those questions honestly, something powerful happens. You begin to break the emotional dependency that keeps you tied to their inconsistency. You stop defining your worth by whether or not they choose you. You stop mistaking their silence for a verdict on your value. You stop chasing clarity from someone who can't even find it within themselves. Instead, you choose clarity for yourself. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, self-compassion, and sometimes deep inner work. You might have to confront your own fears, fears of being alone, fears of abandonment, fears that no one else will love you the way they did. But here's the truth, those fears are illusions. They're stories your mind tells you to keep you tethered to the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. And once you recognize them for what they are, they lose their power. As you pull your focus back to your own growth, the dynamic starts to change. If they try to re-enter your life, you're no longer drawn in by breadcrumbs because you're no longer starving for their attention. If they disappear again, you're no longer shattered because your peace isn't tied to their presence. And in some cases, that very shift becomes the catalyst for them to confront their own fears. Not because you're manipulating them, but because they can no longer control the dynamic in the same way. But whether they change or not isn't the point. The real victory is that you're no longer living your life waiting for someone else to evolve. You're living it on your terms, with your boundaries in alignment with your worth. And from that place, you stop asking, will they come back? And start asking, do I even want them to? That question, that perspective, is where your freedom lies. You see, reclaiming your power isn't about proving anything to them. It's about proving to yourself that your peace, your joy, and your future are too valuable to be held hostage by someone else's fear. And once you fully believe that, the invisible bond that once felt unbreakable starts to dissolve.